The Positive Pause is a motivational-minded podcast covering topics women want to know about as they journey to and through menopause, focusing on subjects that impact women's health and healthy aging, including what it means to age healthfully. The Positive Pause features experts and influencers from a variety of industries and specialties. The information and opinions expressed on the Positive Pause are not intended to replace the services of trained professionals or to provide specific medical advice. To see the National Menopause Foundation's full medical disclaimer, please visit nationalmenopausefoundation.org.
Welcome to the Positive Pause. I'm Claire Gill, founder of the National Menopause Foundation. Joining me for this episode is Heidi Skolnik, co-author of the new book, The Whole Body Reset, Your Weight Loss Plan for a Flat Belly, Optimum Health, and a Body You'll Love at Midlife and Beyond. Heidi is a national nutrition expert and a member of the National Menopause Foundation's Medical Advisory Committee. Her company, Nutrition Conditioning, oversees the performance nutrition program at the Juilliard School and the School of American Ballet, and she has been a part of the Women's Sports Medicine Center at Hospital for Special Surgery in New York City for over 20 years. Thank you for speaking with me today, Heidi.
It is great to be here.
So let's get into it. Weight gain is one of the many symptoms women experience during the menopausal transition. And there just seems to be more and more news articles about it every day, as we've talked about. So let's start by talking first about why you and your co-author, Stephen, decided you needed to write a book about this topic. How did that whole collaboration come about?
Well, Stephen is the executive editor for AARP magazine and the AARP bulletin. And so in his position, that is the question he would field the most. There's 38 million readers. And the thing that he was asked most often was, I eat the same, I exercise the same, but how come I keep putting on weight? And so I think he decided to go ahead and, explore this and to write this book, and reached out to me because he's a journalist, a health journalist. He's been in this space for years and years, but he really wanted the science. And so he reached out to me, and I was more than happy to be part of this great project. It's really not new science in that I have been sitting in conferences and hearing this and reading about this, but I didn't have a platform to share it.
Right.
So it's not like, this is, something new and crazy. This is steeped in science. I cannot believe how much AARP fact checks, like literally every sentence. I mean, I would say, cardiovascular, exercise is good for our heart health. And they would go, I need a reference on that. Right. So this is the question we set out to answer. Mm-hmm. And the good news is there's solid research.
That's really important. And I think, the same thing. There's theories and there's lots of things that happen. And then I also, I understand that, the science evolves and changes. But as you said, there's some kind of tried and true that have been out there for a long time. And when we start talking about these topics that are really important and impact women and men at, a variety of ways, it is important to make sure that, we're looking at the science and then maybe explaining that in a way that makes it a little bit easier for people to understand. So you talked about the fact that it's not kind of new research, but as you were researching the book, what did you find that was most interesting?
Well, I think to begin with, I would bet if we could survey your listeners, one of the things that they would say is, it's my metabolism. My metabolism has slowed down. I think that was something that is a prevalent thought. And the headline is, that's not true.
Wow.
Landmark study came out last year that really disproved that. Our metabolisms do not change in any significant way from our 20s to our 60s.
Interesting.
But what does change, and this is the crux of it, is we begin to lose muscle around age 30 to 40. We begin to lose about a little less than 1% per year. So think about that between age 40 and 60.
Yeah.
That's a lot of muscle.
Yeah.
And that does lower our metabolism. It's not that our individual cells, and I don't know how much in the science you want to go, but I think it's interesting to understand, right, that our individual cells are still very, very capable of metabolizing it. That doesn't change. But because we have less muscle, we have less sort of active cells. And sort of that's the way, I don't know if I'm getting that exactly technically correct, but from a concept standpoint, understand we just have less metabolically active tissue because we've lost muscle. And that's what's so active. I mean, there's other things in our body active, but in general. So that's why as we're losing muscle and we're gaining fat because our muscle burns more and is more active.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's, and then I could tell you what we can do about it, but that's like really the big shift. It's not our metabolism, but we are losing muscle and then we're putting on fat.
It does make sense when you think about, the fact that all of the things that are so much connected when it comes to both nutrition and exercise. And, even obviously when we talked about bone health, which you and I are both very passionate about, that muscle strengthening exercises plays a huge role as well as, the weight bearing exercise. And maybe people don't think about that because we're told we have a different vision of, I think, of what muscle building exercises are, right? No one wants to be a weightlifter. And we spend a lot of time telling people you're not going to have like huge, big, bulky muscles from lifting 10-pound weights. So it's a different perspective. But let's go back to that, like you said. So we know now that we need to focus on muscle. And what are some of those things that we could do at midlife that maybe we haven't done before that would help us to kind of maintain our muscle strength?
So what happens as we age is we become anabolically resistant. That's a big word to say that our bodies are, we always break down and rebuild. And so we break down muscle, we rebuild muscle, but we're breaking it down and we don't build it at the same rate. When you're young, you drink a glass of milk, there's 8 grams of protein in that milk and it's all muscle. These young kids, right? When we become older, we drink that glass of milk and your muscles go, give me more. So we need to overcome that resistance with more protein more often. That's called protein timing. And we need to hit 25 grams of protein at every meal in order to overcome that resistance to building protein. And so we kind of need that amount of protein to press that muscle building button. It needs to be pressed. It needs to be pressed with more and more often.
Okay. And there's not that same benefit then if you were to get all of your protein in one meal. You really need it spread out during the day?
Exactly. So this is not a high protein diet. This is an adequate protein diet. Most people eat like 60% of their protein at night and they're getting much less in the morning. Or maybe I think it's 60 or 90%. It's like 60 grams at night and 10 in the morning. So think about it. For most people, when they start the day, if they even eat breakfast, they will have, let's say, a bowl of oatmeal and they think I'm being really healthy here. And certainly oatmeal is nutritious, but there's not a lot of protein. Or even they might have like a high fiber cereal with a glass of milk. It's not enough protein. Certainly they may have a croissant in a latte, but there's no protein. Like it's not about the croissant. It's about there's not enough protein.
Right.
And so this is very much focused on what you can be eating, what you can be adding to meet your nutritional needs and to keep you healthy midlife and beyond. So maintaining your muscle with protein timing, meaning you have to get it in early. So whether that means having, a nice bowl of Greek yogurt, with fruit and some nuts, or with, toast with some avocado, it might be having cottage cheese on a waffle. It might be having eggs, but it's not an egg or 2 eggs. You actually have to have like eggs with cheese or have, so it has to be enough to, in the whole body reset. We certainly go through all different ideas of different, could be lox. I'm from New York. That's one of my people. So you can have, lox for breakfast on a half a bagel with lettuce and capers. There's so many choices. You can make a smoothie and use a protein powder if you want. You could do tofu scramble if you're vegan. So there's lots of choices, no matter what your preference. Is about getting that protein in early, because if you miss that, you're not in a muscle building mode for the rest of the day. And then again, many people as they get older and, like we're going through menopause and we care, we're so concerned like, I'm going to eat a salad. But a salad depends on how you build that salad. If you don't have protein, if you're just having like lettuce with some carrots, shredded carrots and cucumbers or something, that's not, or even if you sprinkle some beans. That's not enough protein. You have to hit that 25 grams of protein. A little less if you're a very small person, maybe a little bit more if you're, much larger, but it's that 25 to 30 grams for most people. And have that at lunch. Now it's easier. Like, again, if you get a turkey sandwich, you're probably getting there. But it does depend on your choices.
Yeah.
Some at snacks and then at dinner. Most people do have that more well-rounded dinner and they get the protein. If anything, they overeat it.
Yeah.
So it's protein timing throughout the day. That's just so important.
That's really interesting. And I said, that's really very different than some of the things that we hear. Again, we get the overall numbers of, how much we're supposed to have in our diet, even like the same thing, you need 5 fruits and vegetables a day, the My Plate type stuff. Even if you're following that, it's really interesting that how you consume it and when you consume it is just as important as how much you're consuming is kind of, that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. So even things that are very well researched, like the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah.
Certainly I support that. But even that doesn't really address your needs for midlife and beyond. It doesn't address how much protein when for us to make sure we're maintaining our muscle, that we're able to still build muscle as opposed to just be in a breakdown mode.
Yeah. And
so
it's funny.
And this does whatever your food preferences are. This, again, all foods fit, right? We're not bashing any food. So have whatever you want. Just make sure you're having enough of it. I think women, we are in a culture where we are bombarded with messaging around dieting and eating less. And this is really about eating more to be satisfying, to be fulfilling, and to keep our body moving. The more muscle you have, or having adequate muscle as well, is important for so much more than weight. It has to do with our mobility, our bone health. It's related to preventing diabetes, maintaining adequate blood sugar. It helps our brain health and cognitive function, our cardiovascular health, right? Our blood pressure, our cholesterol. So there's just so many reasons to maintain our muscle that has a lot to do with function as it does with aesthetics.
Yeah, that is really important. And as you said, I think particularly as we get older, because that living that independent life and the activities that we all intend to do and want to continue to do are really dependent on that muscle and obviously the bone strength as well. But applying that to nutrition as well as exercise is really interesting, because I think even people who potentially are doing, everything they need to do as far as working out and making sure that they are doing some weight training and they're keeping that going. But if they're not activating that muscle button, like you said, in the diet, they're not going to get the same benefit that they could if they combined the two.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because most people don't include what you just said, which is resistance training, when they talk about exercise and activity and movement as we get older. I know I grew up in a generation that was very cardiovascular endurance focused. It was like, if you had a pair of sneakers, you're good. Just go out and run the miles, pound the pavement, or get on that elliptical and go, go, go. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, as we get older, of course, cardiovascular is important. We know as women age and post-menopause, our risk for heart disease increases. So we want to keep a good cardiovascular health through doing aerobic activity. However, it's not about more. What's really important to maintain our muscle is doing that strength training, even twice, 2 to 3 times a week. And we don't have to be doing heavy duty, bodybuilding. We want to hit the major muscle groups, and then you could do more if you want. And I like it. I like the way I feel. I like feeling strong and powerful, and I do like the way it shapes my body. But you can do arms, you can do biceps and triceps. But it's really important for independence to do squats, and you could start with no weight and build. But don't be afraid, to add weight as you get stronger. But start with some basics, and we have examples in the book for that as well. But as you said it, and it's right on, the combination, doing the protein timing and what we lay out in the whole body reset, even without exercise, is beneficial. But when you combine it with strength training, that's a magnitude that's just a win-win.
Yeah.
And it just really makes all the difference. And this is not The feedback from this book has, I have to say, been incredible. And we did do a panel with AARP employees before we even wrote the book to see if, how it really felt. And people feel good right away because they feel more energized and they're not as hungry later at night. And they're, all of those wonderful things that you can feel right away from eating well. But the real, I think, beauty in this is that we're talking long term, right? We're in this for the long haul. My priorities have changed as I age, and what I care about has changed. And I do think about, am I going to be there for my child as he ages? Am I going to be there for my grandchildren? How am I going to be, now I feel great, but how am I going to be in 10 years? How am I going to be in 20 years? Am I going to be independent? And maintaining your muscle is like the same way. It's a slow, gradual loss from your 40s to your 60s when you're not really paying attention. And all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, how body composition change so much. It's also a slow and gradual maintenance so that, over time you adopt these patterns of eating and all of a sudden you realize, hey, I'm strong, and I have muscle and I'm functional. Like in the end, functional, and your functional might mean something different than mine. I might want to climb mountains and you might want to climb stairs, whatever it might be. But we all want to be functional for whatever we're passionate about.
Yeah.
And this is really about, these slow things that happen to our bodies over time. And the good news is there's something we can do about it.
That is the good news. And I think it's sort of changing a perspective on aging, which I think society is slowly coming around to, where this active aging that we talk about, or healthy aging, is starting to catch on a little bit. And as you said, it's what do we do that keeps us doing what we love to do longer? It's not really that complicated. It's funny when we talk about, like, we kind of all know what we need to do and how to do it, but we need to really just put some things in place that will get us doing it. And, I think adding these tips for people about what are some of the things that make the most impact for the longest period of time. And we've just been discussing that whole protein timing is something that's so simple, but can be really impactful as we think about, what that means for us long term. What are some other things that you think, besides protein timing, are sort of simple things for overall health? Just, I know, asking you about, every woman at every age, it's different for everybody, but, what are some general things that you think from your experience are good for women in practice?
Well, there's a few things for sure, but, let me just go back for a second and just say that, within the whole body reset, we do go beyond protein timing, which is for sure the cornerstone. But we do talk about fiber and understanding its role in our gut health, and green leafies in our brain health, folate and things like that. And also fruits and vegetables, which if you're thinking about any diet that tells you to limit that, like keep going, because, that anti-inflammation, it's not just the nutrients that are so important, like vitamin C for soft tissue damage. And, it's also about the anti-inflammation and the effect that has on our body that makes a big difference in maintaining muscle.
Yeah.
As well as, we heard about all the different healthy fats, but that plays a role, it seems. And this is sort of, they're still figuring out how in terms of anti-inflammation, but may also have something to do with the mitochondria within our cells to help keeping them functioning, which is the powerhouse of the cell, longer. So there's all of these different things. We need a little bit more B12 as we age. We talk about calcium, bone health. So it's not just one thing, but the cornerstone is for sure muscle. But there are many, many things without making it overwhelming. And again, the point is to eat more. We're always told to eat less and to cut out foods, but this is really about eating more of that, more foods that your body needs, that your body will feel good about having, that kind of crowds out some of the other stuff that maybe we don't want to be having as much of. But it's not about eliminating anything.
Yeah.
And I just do think that that's a wonderful message, and one that I know I can embrace and my peers can embrace.
Yeah, that is really important as far as, all of the messages that we hear about what to do and particularly as we age. And when we think about the scary statistics that come out about, what is it? Is it something like 10 pounds a year or a decade? I can't remember what the exact statistic is, but, we hear all of these things about what's going to happen. And that automatically makes you think, oh, then less. I need to eat less. I need to, cut back on all of these things that could potentially be adding to those pounds. But that's not really the best for people.
No, and in fact, look, portions, absolutely. We're in a culture that pushes big portions, and portion size, yes, portions matter. And we are culturally encouraged to eat more. At the same time, we have all these messages about eating less. It's very confusing and it's very conflicting.
Yeah.
But going on a diet is one sure way to gain weight. And our bodies, when we try to eat less, our bodies get hungry and they push us to eat more. And when we lose weight, even with intermittent fasting, which is so popular, and I know a lot of people who are going through menopause, postmenopause, are beginning to really think about brain health and all these other things. But intermittent fasting has been shown, they looked at a study came out and they looked at time restricted eating, intermittent fasting, and a control group. And they both had the same number of calories.
Okay.
Right? Both groups lost weight. But the difference is in the time restricted group where they missed breakfast, ate later, they lost weight, but their weight came mostly from muscle. 60% came from muscle.
Oh, wow.
In the control group, same number of calories, lost the same amount of weight. They maintained more muscle, lost more fat.
Wow.
I think 30% came from muscle. So you're always going to lose a little bit of muscle when you lose weight, but it is so hard to keep that muscle and gain that muscle. You want to maintain as much of that muscle as you can. And so weight loss is not the ultimate factor. Maintaining fat loss is helpful.
Okay.
Muscle loss is not.
Okay.
And so I think it's shifting how we think. It's not like skinny at all costs, right?
Right.
There is a cost and it's not a worthwhile one. We want to maintain our muscle because that's what drives our health and our function.
So what about the people then who are approaching midlife already, at something that they feel is a little fatter than they want to be is the easiest way to say it, right? They're a little heavier than they want to be. So this doesn't mean then that they can't lose weight.
No, they can lose
as weight. Well as, and as long as they're not losing muscle is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
They want to try to be eating in a way that supports maintaining the muscle they have, moving in a way that supports the muscle they have.
Okay.
And look, there's some shifts there are some hormonal shifts. We lay down fat a little bit. There's skin elasticity. There's some things that happen that there's not much we can do, but we can maintain our muscle. And I think, again, focusing on that and focusing on function, but, and sort of taking a little inventory and pressing a reset button on our patterns, right? And our patterns go beyond just nutrition. It does go into how much we move. It goes into our relationships. It goes into our attitude. It goes into our sleep. We hear more and more importance of sleep and how that affects our health and well-being and our ability to manage our weight. Our gut health is related to our weight. There are so many different things. And I don't mean to say that to overwhelm people, but to just recognize that there's more than one way and more than one thing that they can do to help themselves as they go through changes.
Well, I think it's important to say that it's not super easy, only because I think we naturally look for the super easy way, right? And it was like, if you can just give me a pill that, drops the fat and builds my muscle, I'm all in, right? But that's not the way it works. And so it is important to know that it might be a little more complicated, but just to learn it, just to know what you need to do might be a little complicated. You might have to, spend a little time reading the Whole Body Reset and checking out, listening to this podcast a couple of times. But the benefits are really much longer term. So I think it's okay that it's to say that it's not super easy. It doesn't have to be super easy. It just needs to be manageable. It just needs to be something that people can do if they just spend a little time focus on it. Jumping off a little bit, I have another question about the muscle part. So I know when I was younger and was working out more than I am doing now, which I have to change, but I actually gained weight as I built the muscle. And, I was kind of worried about that, but I was working with a trainer at the time and he's like, no, trust me. It's important that we build this muscle because in the end, that's going to help with weight loss. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't diet at all. I was just building muscle and moving more. And then I ended up losing weight. And eventually, right, I put on a few pounds of muscle and then that helped it move. Is that the same as we reach midlife? If you are doing the right thing, whatever, that the healthy thing, will you actually put on kind of muscle weight a little bit before you potentially start to see your body change in a healthier way?
That's an interesting question. I think it depends on how aggressively you're really doing that strength training. It certainly is possible. I think for most people, it's more gradual than that.
Okay.
And there's just sort of a shift in body composition. I'm not sure how much that they're going to increase weight first based on muscle, though it's, again, it's possible. And again, it depends on what they're doing around strength training. But for the most part, I think that maintaining their muscle over time, they would see more of a fat loss.
Okay.
And that is, again, with our panel, we saw tremendous amount of, we saw everything from very modest weight loss over time to people who lost over 20 pounds.
Wow.
In I'm actually forgetting if it was a 6-week or 12-week program, but it was like pretty significant weight loss. And it was a significant number of people that experienced that, again, from more modest to, 1 pound a week to those who are way more aggressive. So it varies. Everyone's individual. I love to put the numbers out there because I think it's encouraging, but I hate to put numbers out there because I don't think comparing is helpful.
Right.
It's, how we feel, what we are trying to do, what we want to accomplish, where we're starting from, how close or far we are from the patterns. Like, again, I'm, how do I say this? Fat is not a behavior.
Oh,
right.
Right.
So we're all born with different bodies and we've all come to, we've all been on a journey to get to where we are at this stage of our life. And so all we really can do is put effort forth toward process. And the process leads us to an outcome that is where we'll be based on. So we can, try to include protein at every meal, make sure we hit some, make sure we're having fiber.
Mm-hmm.
And each meal, we recommend 7 grams of fiber at a meal and some at snacks. Like your goal is to get over 24 or so, but you're focusing on how do I do that throughout the day by adding foods that I really like. And I might just switch out. I didn't know that this didn't have fiber, but I realized this does. I really like this food. So let me do that, and yay, I get to add fat and that makes the food taste good. And I'm also absorbing fat soluble vitamins, ADE, so like there's a reason I'm going to try to move more often. And it can be purposeful movement. It can be movement really like taking the stairs more or walking 10 minutes, or you're starting where you are and building from where you are. And so you focus on the process and the patterns and your outcome is your outcome. Yeah. But I can't just focus on the outcome without focusing on the process. And we do that all the time. Usually more like at work, like you don't just say, oh, I finished that. I want to do that project. You don't break it down into steps of how you're going to accomplish that project right. You break it down into how am I going to approach this? So I'm way more behavior driven and process driven in goal setting than I am in outcome because the outcome I can't control, but I don't even love using the word control in my patterns, but I do. I have some efficacy and mastery over the choices I make on a day-to-day basis in terms of my behavior, what I can do, but I can't control what.
Yeah, you ultimately don't know where that's going to end up. None of us do. But if you're putting
the science tells us when you do this, right? When you do this, you will be healthier.
That's
right.
It.
When you eat more fruits and vegetables, when you have more fiber, when you have more protein timing, you maintain more muscle, and that will result in a better health outcome. My mood is better. My energy is better. That feels good on a day-to-day basis. I start moving. I start building strength. That empowers me. My posture is better. My mobility is better. I now can move more. That all builds on itself.
And I think as we age and as we think about, as you said, things that matter to us, I think all of that you just listed becomes more important than some of the superficial, what I look like kind of thing than it did perhaps when we were in our 20s and our 30s and such. You realize that being healthy looks very different and that's okay. you know?
Yeah. And the other thing is, let's face it all. I mean, I think women, we carry with us, body image is very complicated. It starts young. It's something, when do we ever reach a place of full body acceptance? What is that? Body neutrality, body positivity, that we can have a whole other podcast on that.
Right.
But I think we can, it's hard to say. I don't want to say this in a negative way. I think a little bit of vanity is good. We all care. I mean, it's okay to acknowledge that I care about what I look like, even as I'm aging, right? I want to be sharp and yes, I care more about my health than that, but I also care about that. I just don't care about that at the extent of my health.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And I also hope I have my own personal style, regardless of my age.
That's right.
I want to keep my style. I have in my circle of girlfriends, we all have different styles.
Mm-hmm.
And we know each other's style and what they, I kind of know what kind of outfit. One of my friends is a little more bohemian and one's really kind of high styling and one's more down to earth, crunchy, whatever. Like we all have our different styles. And that's actually not driven by our weight per se.
That's right.
So it's not about not caring about how we look. It's great to care about how we look. It's just to the extent that as long as in order to drive that, we are not doing things that hurt us. In an effort to be healthy, we sabotage ourselves.
That's right.
And so I think that may seem very mundane or straightforward, but it actually isn't. And what I see, again, people sometimes trying to do.
Yeah. No, you're right. We do, right. As long as you're doing it for the right reason, you're doing it in a healthy way, the outcome will be what the outcome is. And some people are going to, I keep joking, in fact, that I'll be smoking hot in my 50s and that I was going to do that. And, that may or may not happen in my 50s. But what looks good on me.
That's an individual perception.
That's exactly right.
I think being an accomplished woman who, runs organizations and you're a mom and you're like, that's pretty smoking hot to me. You're intelligent, you're focused, right. You're getting it done, man. That's hot.
That's true. That's true. Everything is perspective and personal choice. But again, just being healthy. Define it. Yeah, being healthy is really the most important part. So I'm glad we're talking about that. We covered a lot, and I do love the book. And for those of you listening, I encourage you to check it out because there's also all kinds of great things included in the book. Even like as you said, like what are some of those choices? What are some meal plan options? What are some recipe things that people consider? There's so much in there that I think gives us real inspiration, and that's important. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want people to know in today's session?
I think we covered a lot. I hope people are inspired and again to read the book, not just pushing it, but really I think they'll just find so much information, usable information in there. Have self-compassion.
Yeah.
Start where you are and move forward. It's not a race and it's not a competition. There are things you can do that will really help you feel good. And I think there's a lot in the whole body reset that will help you in that direction.
Well, we all need that. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Heidi, for sharing your expertise and insights. And we'll post information about the book, obviously, The Whole Body Reset, and a link to your business site too, because as I shared a little bit about your background at the top of this program, but it's also really fascinating. And so people might want to learn a little bit more about you. So we'll have all of that information with our podcast notes, and I encourage you to check that out. I hope you've all enjoyed this episode as much as I have. And if you have, then please do encourage others to listen to The Positive Pause and make sure you don't ever miss an episode. And thank you again, Heidi Skolnik, for all that you do to help encourage people to live a healthier, better, longer life. And thank you for listening. We hope you'll tune into the next episode of The Positive Pause.